Welcome, welcome. My name is Tomicah Tillemann. I'm the president of Project Liberty. We are one of two organizations sponsoring Future House, and we are delighted that so many of you have joined us for our conversations this week in Davos. We have had just an unending stream of incredibly rich discussions about the intersection of technology and humanity. And this is one of the most important because we are talking in this conversation about how we ensure the continuing and the continuation of innovation as we build better systems at the intersection of tech and society. How we ensure that new entrants, and especially little tech, are able to be part of the conversation as we design the technology of the future. To help us have this conversation, we have three extraordinary leaders on these topics, and we are going to introduce them now. The first is Payal Vilal, who is the executive. Payal Vilal is the executive vice president of global programs at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. Mitchell Green, who is the founder and managing partner of Lead Edge Capital, and Bill Tai, the chairman of ACTAI Global. And Bill, I want to start with you. You are a legend in the venture space. Those who know you know that you have shown up at the very beginning of every new wave of technology for a long time. You were employee number one at Taiwan Semiconductor. You were very, very early to data. You were one of the first checks, I think the first check into Zoom. You were the first check into Canva. You have just an unbelievable track record of spotting new innovations early, including around decentralization. And you got into decentralization way before it was cool. I think we are seeing now the maturation of a lot of ideas that you helped cultivate many years ago. Talk with us a little bit about what is required to create a level playing field for little tech. We are at a moment when big tech has amassed incredible power, an incredible amount of data, incredible network effects, and all of that creates a very steep climb if you're a new startup, and yet you continue to seed startups that succeed in spite of that. And give us a little bit of insight on how you do that.
Well, yeah. So I think first of all, I'm really old. I've been working in tech since the mid '80s. I used to be a semiconductor chip designer at LSI Logic in Silicon Valley, and I use a context that Tomicah has heard. Kind of waves of technology unfold, and they're always related. So if you imagine like a drop of water hitting a pool, you have these concentric rings that come off of that. And for me, it all started with silicon. And once you had that disruptive change from vacuum tubes to silicon, you could build really dense gear. So there's a wave that grew off of that was, computer equipment, communications equipment. That led to another wave, which was the digitization of the phone networks, or the internet. And then the value then accrued to the edge of the network, the user interface of Facebooks, hundreds of little startups that took no capital to get going. And then data science was built upon that because he who won was the one that understood their data. So I think because I've always been in the mix with all these young entrepreneurs fighting the giants, trying to find what weaponry they can, I just live with it. So I basically just follow them along wave after wave after wave. And my job is to pick the right people in front of the right structural change.
Mitchell, you come in most cases, a little bit later in this story. When companies are a bit bigger, what do you see as the key ingredients for helping level the playing field for little tech in this environment?
I think the biggest thing is the number of times that we have said, well, can't Microsoft do this? Isn't Adobe going to do this? Isn't Facebook going to do this? Like no big company is run. Nobody's figured out how to run a giant business like a small innovative company. And so, we just spoke to this business Cursor last week. That's using it's one of the fastest growing AI software companies around, for writing coding. Like me, who knows nothing about coding, could never build a semiconductor if his life depended on it. I could start writing software programs. Now, you might look at that and say, well, why won't Microsoft do that? They might, but they probably won't. Or they will, and there'll be lots of other companies. I think one interesting thing you might start to see is, between 18 and 19, the top 10, top 12 largest tech companies bought, I think about 120, did 120, 130 deals. Now, over the last 2 years, that number went to the low 50s. And the reason is the DOJ. And under this new administration, you might start to see a lot more deals done. That being said, I do think that governments around the world need to start to think about how to regulate. And this is from an investor's perspective. This is not like what you might hear. Google might be next generation electricity. And so these companies may need to start being regulated because it is really hard today. Like in the era that Facebook was built, you could easily get distribution was plentiful, and like capital was cheap. There wasn't a lot of capital around there. And like today, distribution is really tight, and so it's actually really hard to go build one of these giant new companies, which is even more impressive. That like TikTok, for instance, came to the States and just built this giant business in the face of the internet juggernauts already being here.
We'll come back to that in just a minute. Payal, you have a really unique role in all of this because Mastercard is obviously a massive organization with incredible scale, so much so that you can leverage philanthropic capital to address market failures. And Mitchell just spoke to a couple of very specific market failures that he's experiencing as an investor. What do you see in the philanthropic engagement that you lead that can help address the challenges faced by small businesses, micro enterprises, and those that are at earlier stages of the innovation process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of I'm approaching this slightly differently in that it's how do we help democratize technology so that it spurns economic development. And I think the thing that we have to keep really a watchful eye on is how we make sure that digital inequality isn't just exacerbated. And so what we're trying to do in the spirit of inclusive growth is make sure that micro and small businesses, so I'm talking about a micro business that might have one employee or two or three employees, how do we give technology in their hands so that they're able to save time and make money? Because what's happening is really big companies are able to harness the power of technology, but these micro merchants aren't able to. And so what we're doing is we're trying to get really concrete with how a small business can digitalize their operations. So, how they might go from a brick and mortar to social selling, or how they might go into e commerce, or how they might transition to a CRM system, and then why that helps them be more productive and how that helps them grow their revenues. And so that's what we're really focused on, is actually making the digital economy work for everyone, because at the moment it's not set up to do that.
So, Bill, I want to see if we can wrap some of these lessons that we've heard in our first round into a quick conversation, at least around decentralization. When I first started looking at decentralization, you were one of the stewards and Sherpas of the best conversations that I encountered around what good decentralization could look like. And we are at a moment now where there seems to be a bit of a new renaissance in thinking, particularly at the intersection of AI and decentralization, around how people can hold their data, control their data, and have a bit more of a say in how they participate in innovation and hopefully benefit from that. How are you thinking about these issues as you look at the next ripple that's going to come out from this new set of droplets that are coming into contact with the pond of innovation?
We are in such a great era for this type of thing. When I think about back to when I started working on like all the hardware chips, none of that stuff I'll use a word loosely, none of it was internetworked. If you came up with a chip, you had a distributor, a physical sales channel, somebody designed it in, and this thing was a discrete, isolated thing. Internet didn't exist. I was funding companies before there was a commercial internet, so you were building hard individual products that you had to manufacture in many multiples. And I think as the layers that I described unfolded, you ended up with an internet-worked fabric with like AI's been around for many decades. People say think it's recent, but I found a machine learning company in 2011. But it's the intelligence layer that you can build on all of these discrete elements that are interconnected. It gives you amazing power. So what and some of the companies I funded, if you think about what Zoom and Canva are, Zoom is basically an internetworking protocol for people. So you can have these vast organizations distributed around the world and and capture this collective energy. Because I think it's going to sound a little weird, but I think when I start a company that really hits it, it's just a wave of energy. It's the capturing of the interest, the productivity, the energy ball of a bunch of interesting people on a mission. It doesn't scale to the giant companies, which is why there's a chance.
Yeah.
Because I think anytime you've got these like hardworking, typically kids that they're just on a mission, you're gonna out execute the big giants that are showing up 9 to 5 and playing politics. And so I think the tools are all there now. I think the way things have played out, you can now empower people. That Canva, for example, they are basically an economic empowerment engine for any kid sitting in front of a computer. They can be their own business. So I think we're in a wonderful world, and all this blockchain stuff that I've been working on for 15 years. It's mind blowing the infrastructure that is coming to reduce friction, make it more replicable, make it more scalable in finance and many other things.
Mitchell, it looked like some of that resonated with you.
No, when he said we just spun a company. We had a software company that makes like cardiac monitoring software. Again, it's like very vertical. If you have a pacemaker in your body or a loop device, it sends data to a watch or your phone, which sends data to your cardiologist. Like its software is like attacked everything. We just spun out a company. My partner spun out a company of a public company, a big public company, and he said, Mitchell, you and I would last at this public company 3 days. They would have meetings about a meeting that was going to happen. Literally, the fact that exists is the reason that entrepreneurs around the world, or young or old people, will be successful starting companies against big giants.
So, Payal, help us think a little bit about the social dimensions
Yeah.
of these dynamics, because the folks in this room, by and large, there may be a few exceptions, but the folks in this room have lots of people thinking about how to solve their problems. There are lots of entrepreneurs out there thinking about how you address the issues of the people in this room, because we're a lucky bunch. There are a bunch of other folks on this planet who don't have conference rooms or coffee shops full of young entrepreneurs or mid-sized startups that are worried about how you solve their problems. What do you do for those people?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start to say that I am really bullish about emerging technology and the impact that it can have on inclusive growth. We just ran an innovation challenge asking for proposals around use cases of AI to accelerate impact. In like 4 weeks, we got 500 applications from around the world, really incredible use cases. And so, one was using alternative data like mobile network data and social media data to de-risk lending to women entrepreneurs in Colombia. Another is in the US that is matching underserved individuals to federal assistance programs that they didn't know about. So the first point I want to make is that I think there is a lot of opportunity. But I think what isn't baked into the system now is a set of incentives to really make sure that nothing is exacerbating inequality. And what I mean by that is a lot of these technologies and a lot of the algorithms are based on data sets that aren't totally representative. So we did some testing of some machine learning lending algorithms across India, Nigeria, and Mexico. And what we found was that the algorithms were rejecting loan applications from women at a much higher rate than if it were just a loan officer sitting behind the desk. And it's because that algorithm was based on a data set that didn't have enough women in that data set. And so there needs to be an incentive set as technologists and innovators are thinking about how can we solve all of the problems in the world. There needs to be some kind of incentive to drive, okay, is this going to help or hinder inclusion? And I think that's part of the role of philanthropy, is to just say, this is really exciting, but let's just do a double check to see, is this going to help or hinder?
So Mitchell and Bill, help us on this a little bit, because I think Payal's bringing up a really important point. We heard earlier in the day a quote from Charlie Munger, the famed investor, who says, and you'll know the reference, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. In what you're doing, what incentives would lead to better outcomes? What set of changed incentives would deliver technology that more of us could feel really good about and be proud of?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, boy, yeah, so I don't mean to evade the
Clearly
question.
an easy question.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for it's I think it's inspiration and empowerment, really, because that's the key. If you don't have that, you will never have a company make it, no matter what your data is. So I think it's uh, making examples very visible. I've had amazing fortune to start companies or help fuel the founding of companies in Japan with Treasure Data, in Perth, Australia with Canva, Bitfury out of Europe, Dyad. I took the Cambridge Analytica team out in the UK. If I look back 20, 30 years, none of that would have happened, right? And when I came out to Silicon Valley, it was because I had heard of Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs making these pieces of wood with parts on them, and when that company became successful, it makes you think, oh, maybe I could do that too. So I think it's really just holding up these bright shining examples so people are empowered to try.
And the internet nowadays allows people to build companies from literally anywhere. I mean, we're investors in a company called Grafana, which is a really fast-growing next-generation Datadog, which is a $40 billion company built on open source, and like the team is completely distributed all over the world. Like you can now build companies from anywhere, attacking any markets.
So I want to double click on this concept of geography because we're seeing this play out in tech in two very different and disconcerting ways. One is that, as you're outlining now, Mitchell, we are seeing decentralized teams be able to do incredible things. And this is an awesome moment for decentralized teams.
Thanks to Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Zoom obviously was a huge piece of that. So, Bill, we take our proverbial hats off. You're the only one who has a real hat. But that has certainly made life easier for those who want to work on a distributed basis. But we're also seeing the reemergence of geography play a really critical role. And I'll come to this in just a second on TikTok, Mitchell. But I'm eager to get your take on this, Payal, particularly as it relates to questions of digital infrastructure and digital public infrastructure as well.
Yeah, so what I'd say is, as much as our instinct is to go purely digital, what we're finding is that there always needs to be this blend of tech and touch. And so increasingly there's a real focus on local solutions built by local communities. I think you're seeing that across philanthropy. I think in some cases you're seeing that across the development of emerging tech and innovation as well. And so I think the question for me is, how do you continue to foster that local innovation and that local power, and how do you also look across? So like what is the incentive set to be able to cross pollinate it? Because what I am afraid of is that there becomes this innovation fragmentation, and then we're not able to achieve and address the issues at scale. So I don't think the model of top down or one global solution that works for everyone works, but I also think having 1,000 flowers blooming might not be the best use of resource either.
So, Mitchell, you've invested in a bunch of different geographies and you have companies in many different parts of the world. One of them, TikTok, as you said, came to the United States, made a massive investment to scale in the United States, was successful in scaling, and now has 170 million users in the US. They also, I think, have faced real challenges. And in April, Congress passed legislation mandating either a qualified divestiture or closure of the platform. What do you think are the lessons and the challenges around geography and innovation that we should be thinking about in the current environment? Full disclosure, Project Liberty has submitted an active bid for the U.S. assets of TikTok.
You're going to need a lot of money if you're going to buy it. But as I've told Frank, but if you're starting companies, so stepping back, the vast majority of ByteDance's revenue, like TikTok TikTok in the U.S. is actually like largely irrelevant to the overall business. To the actually exactly. What's fascinating though is that I think people fail to recognize that like China has always wanted to build like a truly global business. And what I mean by that is Nike is an American business that you can buy in, I don't know, 150 countries around the world. You can probably buy John Deere tractors in 80 countries around the world. There really is no Chinese business that was like truly a global business. You know, like Spotify is a Swedish business that they spread globally. If you are going to start a truly global business, you better be sure that the countries you want to go into are going to get along with each other. And you are seeing that, and like the reality is like if people think that the Chinese government is just going to let TikTok, you know, Americans take TikTok and put it in their own pockets, I think we have another thing coming for us. Now, could we see a situation where they'll say, "Listen, we'll divest it. We'll own 30% of it," or I'm making a number up, but we're still there. I.e., like it would be pretty powerful if the New York Times was in China, but still only own like 30% of their business. But like I do think it's if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to start and you're trying to start a global business, you got to be really careful in like the political crosswinds of what you might get caught in. Like Eric at Zoom has been caught in these crosswinds
Oh, yeah,
because
big
I mean
time.
Zoom, no venture. So Zoom was this company that 12 years before Sequoia had invested, it started, and nobody was like, Zoom, like WebEx is going to crush them. Like Cisco, it's got this great product. I mean, it's just like
Free Skype, free,
free Skype.
Hangouts.
And Eric won, but just having a better product that is easier to use. I still think it is a better product,
It is.
easier to use. But he has been caught because he had raised, yeah. I saw that he had raised a lot of his original money. He couldn't raise it in America. He went and raised a bunch of money, and but he raised it in like from Hong Kong investors and some Chinese investors and some very small funds over there. And he, as a result of that, he has been caught in the crosswinds of like global political conflict.
So,
You know, let me chime
please.
in on the level playing field. The other thing, other than the inspired entrepreneur, is you need a playing field that actually is level from a regulatory rules standpoint, right? And if there's one country where I haven't found a lot of success, I've some tiny successes, it's China. And so I think I don't know how many of you have heard the phrase, in America, there's rule of law. In China, there's rule by law. Okay, so it is insane. I think because Chinese characters are pictures, I think what happens when you do a contract in Chinese language and you give the series of pictures to any different people, you get different answers for what the contract means. So everything is subjective. And every time I've had a contract, there's a change in the people and the contract is reinterpreted. And then my economics are different. And it's like, how do you build a business when you actually don't know what the rules are, or the rules can just be interpreted to your disfavor or favor? And I think this concept of the Biden farewell speech about we're creeping towards oligopoly. This is a danger. I think we've got great entrepreneurs that a lot of people respect that are surrounding the current president, but it looks like
They're monopolies.
yeah, there's like a potential tilt to rule by law at the behest of certain people that are close to or can write a check, like buy the meme coin and get something done.
I strongly believe, look, when you look what China did 4 or 5 years ago and regulating some of these big internet companies, they effectively, in a week, they were like, listen, Alibaba, Tencent, by the way, they are monopolies. Let's not kid ourselves. They made decisions in like a week or 2 week periods that will take the U.S. Congress 20 years to make. And so, and like these big tech companies are monopolies. They need to be regulated. And I look. I mean, I've said this many times, and I am an investor in ByteDance. It sounds totally insane to say. Social media in this country needs to be regulated. It is the demise of Western society. Like depression, suicide rates, like all these things about children. Like there's a reason that CNBC or the Discovery Channel or Fox or CNN can't go on and show super graphic content, swear, all this stuff. At some point, this social media has to be regulated. I don't know if it'll be under this administration or not, but like it's just gonna get worse and worse. And it needs to be, but wait, it's not just Facebook. And
as a recovering venture capitalist myself, I will say it is a rare day when you see venture capitalists calling for regulation. So you need to sit up and pay very close attention when that happens.
Lots of money in regulated industries. Like
Yeah,
it actually may make these products even more stickier, but it needs to be regulated. And the idea, like, I mean, who do you think wants TikTok out of the States more than anybody? Now, I'm not saying if I was him, I would do the same thing as Mark Zuckerberg. Like getting rid of TikTok is great for Facebook.
So
but they need to regulate it.
Let's discuss, if we can, one possible solution to a number of different challenges that all of you are surfacing. We have challenges around ensuring that small actors can play on a level playing field. We have challenges around geopolitics. We have challenges around monopolies and oligopolies dominating the market landscape. Let's say theoretically, and this is obviously not a theoretical, that people are able to control their own information, that you have more interoperability across platforms so people can move their data and their social graphs and their relationships someplace else if they feel like they're not getting a good deal from the entities that have that data to begin with. And the agency is returned back to individuals, with obviously, moderation done appropriately at the app level. But you flip the power dynamics with big tech. Does that help us?
Define flip the power with big tech.
Flip it. Right now, we click on the terms of service of the big app companies, and they set the terms. We are takers of those terms. If they're clicking on our terms, if we're the ones who get to decide how our information is going to be used and the framework in which our information is going to be used, that's a very different universe. But again, it's a universe that could exist. That technology is available to us now to
well,
to
and
make
there
that
are
happen.
some areas that healthcare, obviously, CEOs in America are getting executed because the system's so messed up. It's 19% of GDP, and every layer of the system is occluded and opaque, and just it's kind of subjective. United Healthcare was denying 32% of all claims. So I think to the extent that you could, in that particular industry, make a person's data their own, self-sovereign, portable, to be able to be exposed to whom you wanted to see it when you needed them to see it, that could be the kind of the catalyzing the change agent for the whole system. So I think there are some industries where that is very important.
And I think there are some use cases here. I live in the UK where open banking is a big thing. And here it's you give active permission to have your data shared with another provider. You say, okay, yes, I want to share my HSBC data with Wise. And then it makes the consumer journey a lot easier to be able to transfer funds. You don't end up having to jump at multiple platforms. So when you can opt in into specific use cases, it works really well, and it is highly regulated.
And I like that you like Wise. We were investors.
Oh, well, good.
And they're trying to deregulate. They're trying to lower costs for consumers and things like that. But Europe is much more, I think, advanced in the privacy and the sharing of data and things like that. Now, supposedly on Facebook and Instagram, there is a way to control some of your data. It's like I wish anybody luck in trying to figure out how to do it. But by the way, they do not make it low friction. But you know what? Social network has actually benefited a lot by all the crazy content you see on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram is actually LinkedIn. Is become a really powerful network in terms of actually high quality content.
Well, and it's interesting, LinkedIn is only about 3% of the revenue of Microsoft. And so they've been able, for a variety of reasons, to keep it cleaner in that regard, because it's worth more to them to have a good, clean source of data and a good, clean platform where people can interact, because it's not the core of their business. And it's created, I think, some intriguing dynamics in that regard.
Like Amazon basically left Zappos alone to run it, and you listen to Alfred Lin or some of these guys talk about it, and I get the impression that Microsoft has done kind of the same thing with LinkedIn, which is actually, I think it would be very hard to go build the next gen LinkedIn, because it's actually such a good product. And normally when big companies acquire things, they mess them up a lot. I actually think Microsoft's done a very good job with it.
So we're going to close momentarily, but before we do, I want to touch on a theme that you raised, Mitchell, very eloquently and poignantly, and that is the topic of the role of the public sector in all of this. And we've seen certainly in Europe pretty far-reaching efforts aimed at regulation. When I speak to European leaders, both in the private sector and in the public sector, they're pretty upfront about the limited outcomes that they have been able to generate as a consequence of that regulation. And so the question I have is, if you were able to line up legal code and technical code, what would that look like? If you had a magic wand, you're king for a day, queen for a day, and you're able to line up your legal code and your technical code, what are some things that you would look for in an optimal system? Any specific outcomes on either side of that ledger, or requirements on either side of that ledger that would help us build a better tech future.
Well, it's tough, and all I can think of is, like code as law. Stanford does a lot of stuff around this subject with Larry Lessig, and yeah, it's
Proud advisor to Project Liberty.
Oh, fantastic!
So,
That's
been
great, because
fantastic.
his brain's been on this subject for 25 years, and it doesn't get simpler the further we go. It just seems like that's one of these spaghetti balls that just has more noodles. Like
I mean, these
that you
AI
gotta
models
plug
are
in.
just going to make it more and more,
Yeah.
more complicated. It's not going to get easier.
Yeah, and then
And you actually need a king. as you can see what happens in China. Like there is a person that decides. Unfortunately, just watch a bunch of congressional, debates or interviews. I mean, you literally watch some of these congressional interviews, like Mark Zuckerberg and like these tech execs, and you're just like, did they really just ask that question? It's like, maybe hopefully that gets solved with time as more people that get elected are more like tech literate. But the amount of like ineptness on some of the people running the U.S. government, and it's just like just tech illiteracy. But now once these people went to Washington, let's see if they can do anything.
Payal, bring us home here. Give us some hope.
Well, so I'm not going to go hope. Actually, I'm going to go dark. The thing that we actually haven't talked about is cybersecurity. And so if I think about the role of the public sector, it's got to be to bolster cybersecurity. This is the big elephant in the room. From my vantage point of helping micro and small businesses, the number of cyber attacks on micro merchants exponential. 65% of them go under because they're a cyber attack. So if there's one call for government in the public sector, we've got to keep things cyber secure.
We think that's the biggest risk globally that people don't talk about. I mean, people think the CrowdStrike thing was a big deal. I mean, that's like a pimple on the butt of something that could be really bad. Like there could be some really bad cyber attacks. And
I did not intend to end with an advertisement, but I will. If you look at the tech industry as a whole, other than the big platforms, the second largest piece of tech right now is cybersecurity, which is a pretty powerful indicator that something isn't working the way it should.
Yeah.
And Project Liberty has built new open source infrastructure that includes, among other things, an open source single sign-on platform that would eliminate a lot of the very broken password architecture that we're stuck relying on right now, and a variety of other tools that we hope are going to get us to a better place in that regard. We're going to need a lot of help from amazing investors and philanthropists like the three of you in that effort. We're going to need a lot of help from all of you in that effort, and we're incredibly grateful to each of you for being part of this conversation today. Please join me in giving a big round of applause for Bill, Mitchell, and Payal as we wrap up this great conversation.
I think Tomicah's voice needs a round of applause too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a very diverse panel.
No more melodic voice that I've ever heard moderating a panel.